Lottie, I told you to clean your room.
What's going on, friends and fellow jackets? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Erin, aka Faye Fire, and we are here today to discuss the fifth episode of Yellowjackets, season 3, which is titled "Did Ty Do That?" Sorry, I had to. So this was a really crazy episode. There was a lot of drama, a lot of mystery, and a lot of suspense, and it kept me on my toes. I was like, this a million times. And it was a big showdown at the end, which was really exciting. Well, the very end was pretty traumatic, but the whole thing was really interesting. I'm so excited to get to talk to you guys about it and get into the details of the episode. So let's go ahead and get started with some of the small details, the episode description and whatnot. We have our cover photo here, which I realize now I made a little mistake on. I put episode 304. This is episode 305. So pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Um, all right, moving on. So the episode description we have here. The Yellowjackets confront the reality of having to pull an old yeller. Lottie mentors an up and coming prophet. In the present, Misty investigates a suspicious death, and Shauna, desperate, turns to the last person she would trust because why not? Sometimes we have to yes and a little bit, right? If we know anything about Walter. Uh, so it was very interesting stuff going on today. I don't have a song of the week because it was kind of a low key music episode. Like there wasn't. I mean, did anything stand out to you guys? Let me know in the comments. Nothing stood out to me, so I can't. I can't even like think of one song that was playing. But that's fine because we were like at a max on the suspense level, so I didn't even notice that we weren't having the jams bumping. We had some characters that as the description tells us, Shauna joining forces with someone unexpected, and that was really entertaining for me. If you guys know anything about me, I love Elijah Wood, I love Walter Tattersall, and I love Frodo Baggins. Okay, I really love anything Elijah Wood does because he's just fantastic. He's so funny, he's so charismatic, and just like such a silly little guy. So I really love him. Absolutely one of my favorites. In fact, we have a matching tattoo, meaning I have a tattoo that him and the rest of the fellowship have. But anyways, that's a little secret for me to share with you guys. So this episode was directed by Jeffrey Bird and it was written by Sarah L. Thompson and Elise Brown. Just so we have all the details. All right. So going into this, we have Misty calling the older women together, and she informs them that Lottie has died. She goes to the morgue to basically confirm that that's her body, to identify her body. And while she's there, we have this really interesting flashback between um it's a vision of younger Misty and younger Lottie laying on the table. We didn't actually see adult Lottie's body on the table, so I think I'm happy with that. I think I'm satisfied with that. Although we did see her feet, which were kind of, um, I mean, I guess like my husband actually pointed out that they looked kind of bruised and almost bloody, but I think that was just kind of, I mean, to me, it looked like normal swelling for decomposition and that kind of thing, but I don't know. You guys tell me what you think in the comments. If anything looked out of the ordinary with her. But thankfully Misty has connections, the citizen detective community is strong and thick. Maybe that came out a little wrong. But but it turns out that the mortician actually is a citizen detective as well, and Misty has some dirt on him, pun intended. And so she kind of threatens him with that, and she ends up being able to obtain Lottie's personal effects, which may have, because they're not blood related. But anyway, she worked that out within her Misty ways. So she brings home her stuff. She realizes the cell phone is not in there. Now, when she's meeting with the other women and she's kind of telling them what happened. We get varied reactions from the adult survivors. So we have Ty, Van, and Shauna. And I love the scene of, Misty saying Ty, Van, and then she doesn't say Shauna. And there's this awkward silence, and Ty and Van are kind of like, hmm. And in comparison to last week with that kind of scene with Jeff at the van where he's like, it seems like something's going on between you guys. I mean, I just love it. Like, Shauna and Misty, whatever they have going on. Obviously, Shauna is like, does she think that Misty has a drinking problem or something? Like, what is her concern here? Unless, maybe she has some guilty feelings, whether that be for how she treated Misty. Maybe she's feeling a little more guilty for how she treated Misty um, because of Lottie dying. Who knows? Or maybe she's just curious as to what she's getting up to. Either way, she decides to follow Misty. And as she does, Walter decides to follow her. It was a very humorous scene. And he comes up and kind of gets right up on her rear end, and he actually, and Shauna, the way she is, she's very confrontational, so she decides to just pull into the next alley, and of course Walter follows her. By the way, Walter's license plate, which says not Walter, very, incognito.
Okay, what the...
Hello, Shauna.
Walter?
He decides to announce that he is the chief citizen detective on the murder of Lottie Matthews. So he's got inside information, who his connections are, how he has this insider information, based on the Reddit post from last week where it shows Lottie's like photos. Yeah, I don't know if that was maybe him in like an alt account or something like that. Who knows? It's very interesting to try and figure it out, but obviously he's got inside information. So, um we're just going to work through Misty's kind of storyline that she has, and then we'll get into the teen stuff because I feel like there's just a lot of meat there to that one. But we'll save that for the second half. Anyhow, so Misty decides she's going to go to the scene of the crime. And this turns out to have been at a sort of penthouse suite apartments kind of thing. There's a doorman, so obviously it's very fancy there. And it takes place in the basement of this building. So Misty goes, she sneaks into the basement area. Um, there's a staircase. She finds there are scratches on the wall. Um, which she compares to, while she was at the morgue, she was, able to take a few little samples and whatnot. And so she was comparing it to what she had found under Lottie's nails, to be like the paint that's on the walls in there. So she's got some ideas of what might have happened. And so she comes out and she starts talking to the front desk guy. She obtains information from him that Lottie had lived there as a child. Her father still lives in the penthouse there, and that she had been staying with him for the last few weeks. So interesting, because when she went to Shauna's, she was very much like, I have nowhere to go, tra la la. Obviously, her stay at the hospital was much shorter than we had been led to believe, because that was the other thing she told Shauna. She had just been released. She shows up with a suitcase. And she came straight to Shauna's because she's lost everything, which is also really surprising. Like, she lost the whole business and her wellness center and like whatever, her property and all of that. I mean, in a matter of just one bad night. I don't know. Little interesting. So Misty decides to go up to Lottie's dad's apartment, and this is where things get really interesting. And I am so excited to talk about this with you guys. Okay. Now, one of the things you might have noticed is that on the door, or I guess the apartment number, the penthouse number is PH1 or PHI. And that tells us so much. Now, obviously, we have spent a ton of time here on the channel talking about the Greek mythology, the symbolism that's been going on, and of course, the Eleusinian mysteries and how that kind of relates to a lot of the themes and the storylines that are going on. The Eleusinian mysteries are related to Persephone and her mother Demeter and Hades and sort of the reincarnation cycle that is associated with that, the life, death, and rebirth cycle. We get a couple of nods to this episode. So of course you guys know I was losing my mind. So that's why I had to pop on here and talk about it with you immediately. So the PHI is really interesting because in the Eleusinian mysteries, there are varying positions. And so there's 6 categories of priests officiated in the Eleusinian mysteries. So, and when they're doing the mysteries, someone is uh, a priestess standing in as Demeter, and they sort of have this um, reenactment of the mysteries that they're doing for the initiates. So, anyhow, the Hierophantes are a male high priest, and this office is inherited through a familial line. This is within the Philidae family or the Eumolpidae families. Okay. And so this is really interesting because this may explain quite a lot. Now, if this is an inherited familial position, something that's passed down through the ages, then we can see why these sort of psychic abilities are present in Lottie and why they're so strong with her, why she's so strongly affected. And I really think that even her father might be affected in the way that he was sort of reacting when he was having that vision. So there's this moment where Shauna goes into Lottie's bedroom and she's kind of, it seems, feeling very remorseful of how things ended with Lottie and how she behaved, which is like, whoa, whoa, Shauna, are you evolving? Like, are you what did Misty say last week? She said, did Shauna come with her tail tucked between her legs to finally apologize? And of course, that's a really difficult thing for Shauna. Um, so yeah, she was standing in Lottie's room feeling very remorseful, and then Lottie's father came in, and now Lottie's dad is having some health issues. It seemingly is suffering with dementia or maybe Alzheimer's, something like that. And he sees this vision of Shauna, but she looks like Lottie, but it's young Lottie, teenage Lottie. And of course, he's a little bit harsh on her, as he always kind of has been. But then he softens and he says to her, I don't understand, what's happening, is kind of what he's saying to her.
I don't get it. I wish I did, but I don't.
And whether that means what's happening with her, because he does mention her having visions, but does that mean that he's also experienced things like that? And that's maybe part of his confusion that he's dealing with? Because as we said, the Hierophante's position is a male high priest. So it's not necessarily affecting Lottie, but of course if it's something that's passed down through the family line, Lottie being the only child, perhaps that's why she's feeling so like strongly affected by it, right? So that's it was a really beautiful and sad scene. And the other thing with that was that we see um he was kind of touching into the other world, or like that other reality that we're kind of leaning into um in season 3. So as Mari kind of said about her cousin and the two realities, and now it seems as though Akilah is also kind of experiencing that. But yeah, with Lottie's dad, he is seeing this vision of Lottie when she's young and conversating with her, and sort of he's also expressing remorse, and it has to be really confusing for him, as dealing with his health struggles, to lose his daughter so suddenly, like, is probably very confusing. um you can see he kind of lashes out at Misty a little bit when she shows up there. So yeah, so Misty shows up and she's trying to kind of find out what information she can because Lottie's cell phone was not in her personal effects from the morgue. And so she goes to try and find the phone. She also finds a receipt in Lottie's jacket, which shows there was like a transfer or a withdrawal of $50,000. And so Misty's trying to find like whatever she can. Lottie's dad is kind of confused, doesn't understand exactly who she is or why she's there, but come to find out that Walter is there already doing his own citizen detective work, and his assistant is Shauna, none other than Shauna. Misty was really surprised to see that and not prepared for someone else to be one step ahead of her. And that kind of seems to be the dynamic between her and Walter. Um, and maybe Misty's not on the top of her game, or maybe Walter is playing like 5D chess. It's really unclear at this point what Walter's motivations are. He said, "Oh, I just thought we were having fun," as he's doing, playing this game with Misty. But Misty is dealing with real emotion, real trauma, and the loss of Lottie. And so for him to kind of be making a game out of it, is very upsetting. And I don't blame her for getting upset. Walter found the phone first, and he was able to. He said he was able to like clone the phone or something like that. And also he had been downloading her like internet history or hacking into her internet history. So he has that information, which he offered to share with Misty. But Misty is just not willing to kind of play ball with him right now. And it's really interesting how quickly, how the turntables, because we can't forget that Walter really got them out of the whole Adam Martin situation. And so her kind of being so harsh on him, he might have real feelings involved, and obviously he's done some really crazy things to help them, but he also was able to manipulate the situation to make Officer Syracuse look guilty when he shot Kevin. It's a very complicated kind of situation, but we got a yes and a little, right. So we have Walter kind of having this heartbroken situation, and he says, "Well, I'll see you around, African Gray, Agent Gray." So, yeah, I don't know. Like my husband was literally immediately, he was like, "Oh, Walter's going to kill her." Like he's like she's breaking his heart and he's not going to take kindly to that after everything that she's done. He's going to kill her. Scary. And obviously we've talked, like Mandy and I have talked so much about Walter and like what his motivations are. We've talked about Misty and her reading that book that was called The Magus. Coach Ben also read the book called The Magus. And so what The Magus is about is like a wealthy man who kind of has this younger man come, and he's playing a lot of psychological games, but the older man's like kind of a wealthy benefactor. He has this fancy like compound, and it's kind of a weird story. I listened to the audiobook a couple years ago, and I don't, yeah. But what you can take from it is that there's a wealthy benefactor who's kind of manipulating a situation to play psychological games with a younger, unknowing victim in a sense. Um, but a victim of their own psychological, like, I don't know, like the limits of their own psychological, like whatever. On that note, Walter also has a boat which is called Great Expectations. And Great Expectations is a story by Charles Dickens, which is also about a wealthy benefactor, Miss Havisham, who is kind of manipulating a situation with a couple of younger victims in a sense and sort of playing like love games with them. Um, but she, yeah, is like a wealthy benefactor. So there's kind of a common theme going on here. And so how Walter fits into that is interesting to see, because Misty is, interwoven into both of these storylines. So clearly there's something going on here. But Misty seems set on figuring out what happened with Lottie. She's dedicated to pursuing that and figuring out what happened with her. Now, also in the adult timeline, we have Ty and Van. And so after they leave basically Misty's house, which was actually a really funny scene, Misty storming out of her own house, like, and then coming back in and being like, you guys need to leave.
Real jerks.
Did Misty just storm out of her own house?
Yeah. Okay, yeah. You need to leave.
Ty and Van go out to breakfast or lunch or what have you. And, we've talked a lot about this on the channel that Ty, she kind of starves herself to prevent the other one from coming out. And that's something that we've noticed is like there's a connection to food with Ty and other Ty. Especially when it comes to meat. So a lot of season 1, we found that Thaisa was a vegetarian. Like when she went to the fundraiser event, she accidentally ate some pate and immediately spit it out once she figured out it was meat. She really avoids eating meat because that's something that draws out that other side of her. And she starves herself. She deprives herself of sleep. Like it's kind of this interesting line she walks. Because those are a couple of the things that draws out the other one. But I also think like the effort she goes through to prevent the other one from coming out kind of draws it out as well. But anyhow, when she's avoiding like getting in contact with that. So anyhow, but now that she's been with Van, she's just been so sort of manic and indulgent. So they're out for breakfast and she's like, "Oh, I just want to order everything on the menu. Let's just get one of everything and just, have a feast." And mind you, like Van has cancer. I mean, granted, it's kind of like in remission, I think. But they haven't really like followed up on that, but that's kind of what we've been led to believe. So it's interesting that she's like, out to eat and her and Ty are always eating. And so obviously Ty and the other Ty are really like becoming one. Like they're really merged together at this point. They're really kind of fluidly operating, or we might say that the other one has taken over because I feel like we're getting more of that energy than we were of, you know, just Thaisa as we know her. And so while they're out to eat, Van kind of starts questioning Ty and she says, "Where were you during that hour when we were apart?" And Thaisa says, "Well, I was just making arrangements for things." And Van's like, "Well, it only takes 15 minutes to, get to this spot. So what were you doing with the rest of the time?" And Ty says, "Oh, I was just making arrangements for things." But then she gets a phone call and it's Simone. And Simone and Sammy are at the park. Sammy has been wanting to see Thaisa. And so they head over to the park. And she brings Van with her. And I mean, it's just so cringe. I mean, let's be real. Like, you couldn't just hang out back at the restaurant or, not come down to the playground. There's nowhere else you could have gone. I just think that was so inappropriate. And so, of course, you got the bombastic side eye from Simone, which honestly deserved. And Thaisa went over to hang out with Sammy, and Steve the dog was there. So wonderful. He's still alive. He was not abandoned at the house to starve or any other worse fate. Thankfully, we've all been concerned about Steve for the last like 2.5 years. So let's be real. But while Ty is standing there with Sammy, apparently Sammy asks her, "Are you still my mommy?" And Thaisa says, "Yes, I'll always be your mommy." And something in that really freaks Sammy out. And he runs away. He picks up Steve and he runs away to Simone. And they just leave. Like, obviously, she sees the fear on her son's face. And so, I don't know, maybe something else happened. Like, we had this flashback to that scene to show that, but maybe he could see the other one, in her eyes. He's had these very traumatic experiences of Thaisa hanging out outside of his window, which is just horrifying. So, I don't know. It's really not good. And I also had this idea. I do wonder if maybe as I said, there are the two families, the Hierophantes. So there's the Filidae and the Eumolpidae. And so I was kind of wondering if maybe Thaisa might come from one of the other the other family. Obviously, we're kind of assuming Lottie might come from the Filidae family. So maybe Thaisa is from the Eumolpidae. It's just an idea. I've always kind of thought that because they are our two prophets. And as I say, Lottie is the prophet of light and Thaisa is a prophet of darkness because she's a prophet of the man with no eyes. And the showrunners have told us that the man with no eyes is the embodiment of death. So we can kind of draw our own conclusions from that. So that about wraps it up for the adult timeline. So let's get into the teen timeline. Let me take a drink of tea because it's time for the tea. All right. So the teen timeline, they are trying to figure out what to do with Coach as far as his sentencing is concerned. In the last episode, we had his trial. They found him guilty of burning the cabin down, even though it seems very obvious that the majority of them have reasonable doubt that was actually the events that happened, that transpired. They don't believe that it was Coach in their heart of hearts. And even if they do believe it was Coach, or even if they do believe he was guilty, like, they don't believe he deserves to die as punishment. The person who's really pushing this idea is Shauna. I mean, she literally says they should burn him, which is so savage of her. Burn him at the stake. And of course, Melissa is kind of her little barking chihuahua who's in favor of, all of these ideas that Shauna has, which is really scary. Not to say, like, Ty doesn't have Van, they all have their sort of little cheerleaders, but Shauna being the butcher and then having a sort of little butcher buddy is just, not such a great relationship. Just putting it out there. The Butcher Queen stuff scares me. I'm scared of Shauna. I really am, and especially after the end of this episode. I mean, I was like, "Oh no. Oh no." I don't know how much longer I'm going to be a Shauna fan. I don't know.
You don't have to enjoy it this much.
And you don't have to act like such a fucking saint.
I'm a nice girl. Okay. So they decide to do a card draw. It chooses. Hashtag it chooses. And they decide to let the wilderness choose. The wilderness decide what his fate will be. And whoever draws the King of Hearts, they decide that is the death card, the execution card. Which, hey, I called it in my Travis video. I was so excited. King of Hearts, that's what the video is called. And I was just really happy, of course, The execution card, the death card. Really interesting stuff. I love it because there's so much symbolism with that. And there's even more of that coming into play with Coach Ben. There's a lot of this green man symbolism, which is a regenerative symbolism, a reincarnation symbolism that is um sort of more Celtic and Norse based. So it's kind of an alternative to a lot of the Greek ideas. And we've been talking about a lot of this in our live streams this season. And of course, again, if you haven't seen the video I made about Travis, definitely check it out. We get into more of it there. And so I'm just loving it. I'm loving it. The vision that Akilah had of Coach, that was very like Arthurian. There was a lot of Arthurian stuff going on in the teen timeline. So I'm excited to talk about that with you guys. So yeah, so they do the card draw, and it's Thaisa. It's Thaisa who draws the King of Hearts. Now, isn't that just fitting? Because I mean, who do we really think burned the cabin down? If there was somebody that was guilty of it, I think we can all agree. I think we can all agree it was Thaisa. Okay. No shade. uh, so that's interesting, oh, how the turntables, the second time I've said that. But it is interesting that she's the one that draws the King of Hearts card. It's just the balance, right? That's the wilderness for you. So she is grappling with this because Thaisa is not an executioner. That's not her vibe. Well, we won't compare it to the adult timeline, but but it's not her vibe. Like she's up to this point, she hasn't really been that person. She's not a killer or a very violent person. I mean, let's not count Allie. I feel like she learned a lot from that experience with Allie, where she kind of reeled it in, where she's like, okay, I'm not going to be like this physically violent person. But maybe now she's having to kind of re-expose that wound of hers. So she and Van are talking about things. They don't necessarily say like who started the fire or anything like that, but Van is trying to lure out other Ty, so that maybe other Ty can be the one to do the job, be the executioner. And then regular Ty will not sort of have that guilt on her shoulders, even though it's all the same. It's just psychosis, right? But so yeah, so they're trying some various things to lure it out, which is kind of cool. Like they're really they have a sex scene, and they're like on the tree, and that was really cool. And then like after that, they go and they're like, okay, well, maybe we need to spill blood. So they actually catch a rabbit in the trap. They slaughter the little bunny and spill the blood. And then, we get this gust of wind coming through. And so, it's like, is that the wilderness or is it just wind? But to them, they were kind of identifying it as these signs. So we see this kind of parallel to what's going on in the adult timeline, where they're sort of trying to manipulate this supernatural power.
Bow, chicka, wow. I'm the nerd.
Okay, so they're aware of the man with no eyes. Obviously, like Thaisa has said that to Van, as when she was kind of like leading her around and stuff like that. And that's who they're trying to appease. But at the same time, in their activity and their actions, it seems more like that's actually appeasing the wilderness entity, if there is a wilderness entity, right? So this is where things get kind of complicated and muddled. And so yeah, so I don't know. I don't know what to think, because the wilderness almost seems more like a symbol of death, or a symbol of life and of living and of raw living and that kind of thing, really being present in the moment, like what they said when they were slaughtering the little bunny, really be present in the moment. And versus the man with no eyes, representing death. So anyhow, they're trying to kind of do this to lure out other Thai. It doesn't seem to be working. They all go back, as a group, and we have this beautiful scene also with Coach Ben, and he's in he's in jail with the ducks, as he said. He's in jail with the birds. He said that in the last episode. And he's sort of staring up in the sky, staring down at the ground. We have this like fantastic Orpheus symbolism, which we've talked about before. Like, and the end of Orpheus's life after he's made the descent into the underworld, and he's come back out, and he made the mistake of looking back, and he sees his wife was behind him. And so, but because he looked back, he didn't trust his deal with Hades. His wife was bound to the underworld forever. And so after he comes back out, Dionysus had been his patron saint, and Dionysus is connected to the underworld, obviously. And Apollo, who is connected to the sun, we have this, you know, contrasting symbolism, these contrasting gods, right? And they have a dichotomy of their own, the Apollo Dionysus dichotomy. So anyhow, but Orpheus decides to have Apollo as his patron god. And this upsets the Maenads. The Maenads are the followers of Dionysus. And so they punish Orpheus for this. They tear him apart, they tear him to shreds in the sunlight. And so it's we're having like a lot of this energy going on, but we also have a lot of Jesus symbolism going on. Like Misty brings the fish in, and we also have so many connections to Javi. With like Javi had a ton of Jesus symbolism. Lisa has a ton of Jesus symbolism. So there's something to this sort of death and reincarnation and that kind of thing. Misty comes in and she basically informs him that this was his last meal and the others will be coming in to fetch him soon. And she gives him this hug and it's this really touching moment. They kind of say their goodbyes. And Coach is like really forgiving. You know, it's like this terrible thing. And like shout out to Sammy Hanratty again for just like being so amazing. Like she is just such an amazing actress. I love watching her play Misty. She just does such a beautiful job and she just is so passionate about it. And so these emotional, beautiful scenes with Ben, these last couple of episodes have just been amazing. And so her giving him the hug and crying, and it's just so touching. And, you know, she had this scene before where like she was really emotional where he was going to jump off the cliff and um and she stopped him and she broke down crying then because she was so upset about what had happened with Shauna's baby and she was unable to save the baby. So we have this kind of same energy going on where Misty is like she feels like a failure, like people are trusting her with their lives and she's failing. And she saved Coach that one time, but, you know, she can't save him this time. And those other girls are so vicious. Like when they come in there, they put the bag over his head and they drag him out there. And he's even like pleading for his life and trying to like, you know, connect with their better natures, but there's just nothing left. They're so violent and irrational at that point. And he ends up pleading for his life and it's really like heart-wrenching as they're all standing there and they all go silent and he's like, hello, is anyone there? Like oh god, it was just very, very intense. And so before we proceed, we also have an alternative storyline going with Lottie and Akilah and Travis. And so after the cards are drawn, Lottie goes to Akilah and she says, you know, we need to go back to the cave. And Akilah's like, really? Like already? Are you sure? And Lottie convinces her that that's what they need to do. And Travis is going to go with them. They're going to have a rope. Everything's going to be okay. So she convinces her to go out there. They go out to the cave. And this was really scary because Akilah decides to go back in. And we know how things went before. We did get a little bit more like hints of what's going on in the cave. There's some water in there. So that could be a hint to what kind of gases we have. Personally, like I've got kind of a project I'm working on towards maybe covering about like what's the yellow haze and all of that kind of connected to like the gases in the cave and all of this. So anyways, I'm kind of working on that. I've been doing a lot of research. I'm not a scientist though, so I don't know if I'm in over my head here, right? Or if it's even worthy of my time. You guys tell me in the comments what you think. If you would like to see a video on that, just let me know. So Akilah goes crawling into the cave and Lottie and Travis are kind of arguing on the other side. They're like, this, Travis is like, I really don't think this is a good idea. And we had this like moment right before Akilah goes in. She tells Travis, you're probably the only person I can trust out here. And that's a really like interesting statement to make because um why him? Is it like, why him? Is it because he's a male figure? Is it something specifically he's done? Is it because Lottie has sort of messed with him, or I don't know, like what's drawing Akilah to Travis, but I'm interested. Um and also we had this great moment of Lottie when she's convincing Akilah, she mentions the Delphic Oracle. So the oracle at the Temple of Apollo, who is also called the Delphic Bee. She is named Pythia, the priestess, and she breathes in the fumes that come up from the mountains where the temple is, which are said to come from the rotting corpse of the python that Apollo slew. Um, and so she breathes in the fumes and she does prophecies, right? And there are priests who take notes of the things that she says and this kind of thing. Obviously, we've talked a lot about Lottie being connected to that Apollo symbolism, being like a priestess of Apollo. But we have this great stuff with Akilah. I love to see it. I love her character being fleshed out. I really like, I was so nervous for her, especially when she was unconscious there for a few minutes. But she has this amazing vision, this amazing dream. And she's at the edge of a cliff, which seems reminiscent of the cliff. Now, shit cliff, right? That's where Crystal fell. And Misty couldn't find her body. So interesting. But and other things have happened over at the cliff. That's actually where Ben was considering, himself, unfortunately. So and that's where Misty saved his life. But did she save his life? Is there something there at the cliff that we don't understand? Really interesting. It's like, I don't know. Don't know. But in Akilah's vision, she sees Ben's body laid across this chasm. There's another side on the other side of the cliff, and his body is gigantic and it's laid across this chasm, and she walks out onto it, and on the other side it's sort of hazy, but she can see kind of lights of the cityscape, and you can hear kind of honking cars, and it's like, is that the other world? Like, okay, so when we talk about these two realities, like, so is that the other world, which is kind of what we live in, what is like, what we're aware of, what is this world? There's cities, there's cars, there's, all of this, there's planes, whatever. Did they somehow cross into the other world? And that's where they're at, and that's why they haven't been discovered. No one can find them. They're in this sort of, as we've talked about, like this access point where they can touch into the other world. So it's almost as if they vanished. Now there's been other kind of like flights that there's been that like have had this sort of kind of idea happen, like the M370 flight, which just kind of vanished. Now, who knows if the Yellowjackets writers were taking any inspiration from that, but it's definitely something. That's even kind of what Lost plays with them sort of crashing into this mysterious island and they can't find their way out. And so I don't know, maybe we are getting into some ideas like that. I like to call it the other world, and it's not necessarily the Celtic other world, but since we are referring to it or these two realities, there's kind of the other world. That's what they call it, the Celtic other world, Anun, and we've talked about that on the live stream before with like the circles of reality and the other world. I could say it enough times. And so Ben, in that moment where his body is laid across, it was like immediately giving me vibes of the Green Knight, right? So there are giants, she's having a vision of the other world. There's like this wild landscape, and the Green Knight is the story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The Green Knight or the Green Man symbolism is like a regenerative, like life, death, rebirth symbolism. He is a psychopomp, so he's escorting souls of the dead to the afterlife, so to the other world, to Anun, which is where souls pass to when they die, or to the underworld in Greek mythology. But this seems to be a little more Celtic in nature.
Here. Need this for you.
I also got major Arthurian vibes when Melissa and Shauna were together, and Melissa gives Shauna this sheath for her knife, which was like this beautiful scene, of course. Now, this was very Arthur and Morgan, so this is definitely some foreshadowing to our Butcher Queen situation. King Arthur, of course, has the sword Excalibur, or Caliburnus. In certain stories, the sword itself is not necessarily the magical item. It's actually the sheath. The scabbard is made by his sister, Morgan Le Fay, who is said to be a sorceress, pictured behind me in this lovely photo. And so the scabbard is a magical item, and it protects Arthur from wounds. It gives him super strength and speed while he has the scabbard on him. And later, when Morgan and Arthur are fighting because because Arthur becomes a Christian, and Morgan is, of course, a pagan because she's like a priestess of the goddess and all of this. Don't get me started on Morgan Le Fay. I could talk about her all day, literally. And so she returns when Arthur is wounded. She kind of hatches a plan with her lover to wound Arthur, and then she sneaks in while he's healing, and she steals the scabbard and like runs away with it. So she doesn't even steal the sword, she steals the scabbard. She could have taken the sword, but she leaves it behind for him. She takes the scabbard and she leaves, and then she like goes into hiding in Avalon. So long story short. But Melissa, Shauna, definitely vibes. Okay. Definitely those kind of vibes. So she's made her magical scabbard. The two of them are crazy. I'm frightened. I'm frightened because Melissa is going hard because she's really trying to impress, her crush, her girlfriend, or what have you. And she's willing to go to some lengths. So coming back around. So we go back to Coach Ben, the execution scene. Thaisa's got the gun, which is terrifying. And so she's holding up Coach, and he's scared, probably peed his pants. I mean, let's be real. Like, I definitely would have. And he's standing up against the tree. And then just at the very last second, Thaisa's other kicks in, and she looks at Van and she's like, it'll be all right. Scary. And so she kicks in, she's about to pull the trigger, and then Lottie, Travis, and Akilah come bashing into the situation. They knock the gun out of the way and save Coach's life. And they're like, look, we've got a situation. These visions are more powerful. Coach is our bridge out of here, Akilah says. I've had the vision. He is our bridge out of here. He is our bridge. He is our bridge. Whew, saved his ass. And so the group goes with it, but Shauna, of course, looks extremely unhappy. Big surprise. She is so out for blood, and it's just terrifying. So then later that night, Coach is back in the jail with the birds, and he is just sitting there, like feeling a bit of relief. Thankfully, he survived the situation. And then who comes waltzing in? The two most terrifying individuals of the bunch, Shauna and Melissa. And I was like, oh my gosh, they're going to kill him. Like, I really thought that they were going to kill him. But it turns out they decided, no, they cut his Achilles heel because Coach is stuck in a like Greek nightmare. Like this isn't just a Greek tragedy. This is a Greek nightmare. He's trapped in there. He's gone through, we talked about this. He's gone through Odysseus. He's gone through Orpheus. He's gone through who's the other O? Who's the other O? Orestes with the trial. And now we're Achilles? Like what? This is wild. So he can't catch a break. I really thought they were going to murder him. I really did. It was terrifying. I was like, I can't believe this. There's no way. Like, start screaming, coach. Like, start drawing attention to yourself because were they, but thankfully that was not the plan. They were just meant to disarm him, like keep him from running away. I don't know. So they cut the Achilles heel and sort of let him bleed. And I mean, it's just really nasty. I don't like it. I just don't like it. All right, Shauna, I don't like that. And no one's willing to speak up against her. And they're all terrified of her to the point that they're all willing to become more vicious because of it, because they're more willing to be nasty and vicious. Like this is kind of human nature, commentary on human nature. They're more fearful of her and willing to become awful themselves because of that fear than risk anything by standing up to her or standing up against her, because they're, they know what she did to Lottie when they beat her, or when she beat her in season 2. She's got the knife. Obviously, she's just increasingly unhinged. And every time she is unchallenged, she becomes more empowered to be as crazy as she wants to be. It's super unhealthy. It's super dangerous. And obviously, this is not going to go well. And we see her and Nat starting to butt heads more and more. There's, continually happening in each episode of the two of them having issues. So it seems like there's only one way for it to go. It's going to continue getting worse and worse for them. Shauna and Melissa, when they come back to the camp, they're like, okay, he's not going anywhere for a while. And then they hold hands. Melissa's got blood on her hands now. And, there was kind of that sick moment where also like Shauna's really encouraging Melissa. She's like, no, you have to do this. Like you have to do this sort of thing to coach, to like prove yourself, or some sort of sick whatever. Maybe she just needs like a partner in crime. She needs someone who also has blood on their hands, so she feels less guilty for her own actions and her own like craziness. But Melissa's, ride or die. Anyway, so they hold hands, and so I guess they're coming out as a couple now. So the rest of the camp were kind of like, whoa, okay, interesting. All right, go girl, I guess. I don't know. Is this good? Are we afraid? I don't know. I'm terrified. That is my review for season 3, episode 5. Did Ty do that? And by the way, actually, one last thing. I absolutely loved the whole banter about Steve Urkel and Thaisa and comparing Stefan Urkel to other Ty. That was chef's kiss. That was fantastic. It's these little things, these little callbacks to season 1 that I think a lot of us are really enjoying throughout season 3. I think they're kind of getting back to that. Obviously, there can be more of a light, humorous energy when they're not in the depths of winter and, Shauna trying to give birth and all kinds of stuff like that. So I'm glad that they're taking the opportunity to do funny things like that. I really loved that whole scene of the Steve Urkel conversation and Ty just being like, "Are you freaking serious?"
So let me get this straight. You're saying the other Ty is cool, and normal me is Steve Urkel.
Thank you all so much for watching. I've got a couple new videos out about Lottie and about Mari. Obviously, I have the other video about Travis, King of Hearts. It was already called King of Hearts. So if you haven't watched that already, definitely check it out. I am just a prophet of the wilderness, just like Lottie. I have obtained her gifts. in her passing. So I am here to serve and share the wilderness prophecies with you. For some reason, I'm just tapping in and I knew about King of Hearts. So what can I say? I'm here to serve, guys. So thank you all so much for watching, and I will be back next Monday. Hopefully, fingers crossed. If you know, you know. I'm having some internet issues. I live literally in the wilderness in Alaska, and they're shutting the internet down for 10 days in the middle of Yellowjackets season. Isn't that fantastic? So I this was pre-recorded and scheduled for you guys, and that's why it's in this video format. So thank you. I apologize we didn't do our normal Monday live stream. And as far as next Monday, I'm not really sure if we'll be doing our normal Monday live stream, but if not, I'll either try to maybe upload a video like this again, or we'll just do another, like maybe we'll do 2 episodes the following week or something like that. I'm trying to do the best I can. Uh there's Starlink. My husband has a Starlink at his work, so I can kind of go there and use the internet a little bit over there. It's very strange. These things happen though. Like this is what happens when you live in the wilderness, and honestly, I'm ready for a little bit of a reset. I have been working super hard on the channel for the last like month just doing stuff for Yellowjackets, and so I'm okay with like, a little reset and breather, and hopefully I can get some writing done for you guys, get some new projects and get some, some ideas and vibes flowing, and also just spend some time in the wilderness cuz I need to touch grass. Sometimes too much Yellowjackets, too little touching grass. So, thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and we will see you in the next one. Jackie out.